If you've been even marginally interested in video games over the past 30 years, you have more than likely heard about Sonic the Hedgehog. Bursting onto the scene in 1991, this little blue hedgehog has made his mark as one of the most iconic characters in gaming, both for better and for worse. Sonic is a series that I grew up with and has been very near and dear to my heart for just as long, but it's also one that I have very complicated feelings about. Sonic has so many games and pieces of media that I absolutely love, like Sonic Adventure, Mania, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic Rush, the IDW comics, and the Sonic movie from 1996. Meanwhile, it also has some pieces of media that I really dislike, like Sonic Chronicles Dark Brotherhood, Sonic 06, Lost World Forces, and the Archie comics. You get the idea. The series has a weirdly wide net of quality to it. In the past few years, we've been on the side of that net that I'm not super into personally. So when Frontiers was announced, I was already not super optimistic about the game. I didn't really change when they finally started showing gameplay leading up to the release, since the first couple of trailers for the game were one of those trailers where it's just really clear that the person they have playing the game doesn't exactly know what they're doing. But then the closer we got to the game's release and the more they showed off, the more interested I ended up being. Something about what they were showing felt different from the last few Sonic games to me. Not only did the gameplay loop look better and better every time they showed it, but hearing that Ian Flynn, the writer of the IDW comics, was the person writing the story got me really interested due to how great he has been writing these characters in there. And I'm happy to say that despite my original reservations, the game is great. I was pleasantly surprised by a lot of things in this game in a way I wasn't expecting going into it. It's probably the most fun I've had with a Sonic game ever, really. The way the gameplay systems work together in this game clicks with me in a way no other 3D Sonic game has, even the ones that I really enjoyed as a kid. I'm really shocked by just how much I've enjoyed this game, but I am getting a little ahead of myself. Why don't we jump into the review proper real quick before I start gushing about every little aspect of it before I'm supposed to. So without further ado, I'm Jay, and let's get to talking about Sonic Frontiers. We're going to start with the story, since that was something I was really looking forward to this time around due to the aforementioned author, and yeah. Oh, one last real quick note, this is going to be absolutely filled with spoilers, so be warned if you want to go into this game relatively blind, you may want to just watch this video after you finish the game. Sonic Frontiers' story starts with Eggman trying to break into an ancient computer system using his new AI daughter in a place called the Starfall Islands, where an extinct civilization left behind a ton of technology and equipment. He then ends up getting trapped within the computer system himself as a ton of angry robots are summoned onto the island. Sonic, Amy, and Tails end up coming to the islands a bit later on their own due to the Chaos Emeralds mysteriously being drawn to this place. Before they can even touch down though, some kind of EMP goes out, sucking the three of them into cyberspace like Eggman was earlier. Sonic manages to break out of his own cyberspace due to him being Sonic the Hedgehog, and he now has to go around and find a way to break his friends out and basically get heckled by Eggman's daughter for the entire rest of the game. His daughter's name is Sage, by the way. I don't believe I mentioned that yet. Sonic goes across each island collecting the Chaos Emeralds in order to fight the enraged robotic colossuses that Sage keeps awakening to fight him while he tries to free his friends from this. This happens a couple times with him fighting to save Amy, Tails, and Knuckles, who by the way got there on his own in a really cool animated short that was released before the game came out. Please go check that out. It's really awesome looking, and I hope Sega does more of that kind of stuff. The longer Sonic goes trying to save them, the more corrupted by cyberspace he ends up being, and it becomes too much for him from just the pure amount of power that's getting pumped into him. In order to fight the final colossus, his friends take back the brunt of the cyber power that Sonic took to free them, giving him enough space to team up with Eggman and Sage to fight the final Titan, and then immediately has that followed by fighting the embodiment of the corruption in the Isles that is kind of like a scene from Majora's Mask. I think. I haven't played that game yet. Anyway, the story ends with the team heading home and all preparing to go on their own journeys after Sonic talks with them throughout the game, which I will get into in a little bit. Overall, I think the story is really solid. It's probably one of the simpler Sonic stories we've gotten in a while, and I think the game works better for that reason. It's a simple plot that works well for Sonic and shows different aspects of the Sonic world while also serving as a way to basically re-establish Sonic's whole thing. They go deep diving into a lot of lore about the series and make a point to mention a large amount of events from throughout the series' history to make it clear where they are, what's happened up to this point, and probably what they're going to do going forward. Something that specifically caught my eye was the idea of the ancients being related to Chaos from Sonic Adventure and the Chaos Emeralds not even being from the planet. I found that really interesting, and it lends itself well to the idea of, as I said earlier, tying the past of the series to its future. I really hope that this is actually followed up on in later games. I would really like to see how the connection here with the Emeralds play into later things as well, since the Emeralds aren't from Earth, but the Master Emerald still is. Not sure what's going on there, and I would love to see what happens. But given Sonic's track record, I do worry a little bit that we might not get more in this storyline. So here's to hoping. Though all this lore and the main plot are pretty fun to think about and I did enjoy it, I think where this game truly shone was in how it treated its cast of characters. The Sonic cast has generally been a selling point of the series since its early days, with pretty much every character being someone's favorite. Yes, even Charmy Bee. Somehow. For a while there though, the entire cast minus Sonic and Eggman were basically neglected or were written really poorly to the point where they didn't even really feel like the same characters. There's no directly stated cause to why this happened, But there are a few things from outside of games themselves, such as fan backlash to the ever-growing cast of characters and the game's not focusing on Sonic, plus the lawsuit with Ken Penders, which, while interesting, is not something I'm going to go into much here because it's outside the scope of this video. You can look it up and you can find a ton of stuff on it already though. Regardless of these, there was a long period of time where the Sonic characters weren't really allowed to grow or change much at all, or even show up in a lot of cases, and they were effectively stuck with extreme forms of how their personalities were originally. Tails became a complete coward who could only rely on Sonic for help instead of just a kid who was a little unsure of himself and still tried his best. Knuckles became an outright idiot instead of just brash and impulsive. Amy somehow had less to do than she did before when she was just obsessing over Sonic, and she just kind of didn't have a character for a while outside of the Boom cartoon. And then that's not even getting into how they treated several other cast members like Shadow, Rouge, Omega, Silver, insert your favorite Sonic character here. While Frontiers doesn't bring in a lot of the characters of Sonic's universe, the ones it does bring in are basically readjusted to get back on track to where they were before, and improved in some ways. Knuckles is back to being wise but impulsive instead of just stupid, and has a really good brotherly rivalry with Sonic in this that we haven't seen in the main games for a while now. Amy actually has a bit of personality now instead of just being the girl of the group who chases after Sonic. And with Tails, well, Tails gets treated the best, I think. Tails had this problem a bit worse than the rest of the cast, where his personality went from the smart but insecure kid who's trying to keep up with his cool older brother into basically every other stereotypical cowardly tech person in media. This was at its worst in Sonic Forces, where Tails was basically cowering in fear and crying out for Sonic to come save him against an enemy Tails himself beat not only in the form we see him in Forces, but as a stronger version of itself as well in that same game where he fought him. Tails basically got treated as a nothing of a sidekick to Sonic who couldn't do anything besides the off-screen tech stuff that Sonic needed done. Frontiers directly calls us out and even says straight up in-game that Tails has been written inconsistently as a character in the series up to this point. Yes, this may be heavy-handed, but I give this game a pass because something like Tails' character being so wildly out of whack, even compared to how the rest of the Sonic cast was treated, needed a lot of attention to get right, and this game does it. Sonic and Tails have a really good heart-to-heart where Tails realizes he needs to grow and figure out who he wants to be without constantly following Sonic around so he can be a consistent friend and support the rest of his friends. It's handled a lot better than I'd have expected a Sonic game to handle character nuance like that, and I absolutely adore it. The game also adds a new character in the form of Sage, who I mentioned earlier was Eggman's AI daughter that is currently manipulating the Starfall Islands to fight back against Sonic. She's an interesting character in my opinion because we actually get to see her change and challenge the notions that were coded into her about Sonic and his friends as the game goes on, and she's exposed more and more to Sonic's ever optimistic personality and changes because of his good heart. It's really well done, and I really like seeing it because it's an interesting commentary on challenging the preconceived notions drilled into us by our parents, and how sometimes what we're told isn't how things actually are. It's something I wasn't expecting in a Sonic game, but I think it's actually really fascinating that it's here. Sage also basically takes the role as the most present villain in the game since Eggman is trapped in cyberspace for most of it. We see him occasionally, and while he's there, he feels like the adventure era Eggman again, but the meat of his character can actually be found in the audio logs you can collect through the fishing minigame. The game has a fishing minigame you can play with Big the Cat. He's in the game surprisingly, which is really interesting considering what characters didn't make it. And if you get enough fishing coins, you can trade them in for audio logs made by Eggman, chronicling him slowly coming to terms with the fact that he's developed paternal feelings towards his creation. And it's interesting because he hasn't felt this way about any of his other robots before. It's definitely a direction I like seeing them take with Eggman, and I really hope they continue this like I do with a lot of other things that started in this game. So you may have noticed there's one character that I haven't talked about a lot yet, and that's Sonic. I saved him for last intentionally because I feel like to talk about who Sonic is in this game, I need to talk about how he's been involved with helping every other character. Sonic has always been a character who, at least in my interpretation of him from across the franchise, is all about trying to help others while also keeping his eyes on the horizon. He's constantly moving towards wherever the wind takes him while making detours to help the people he cares about, or hell, even people he doesn't even know. He's calm, cool, and always ready to spring into action. I think this game really captures the core essence of that in a way I wasn't expecting. I mentioned earlier Sonic's heart-to-heart with Tails that helped Tails get started on a new direction he wanted to take in his life, and him just being around Sage making her see Sonic's true intentions and like how he is as a person. And then there's also scenes like this with Knuckles and Amy as well, where Sonic is just being himself, helps his friends figure out something about themselves or make a decision on where to go after this is all said and done. As the game ends, the crew all decide to go their separate ways to carve out their own paths and seek out their own goals, all because Sonic was telling them to when he was there with them. He cares about his friends, but he wants to see them grow, and if he thinks them going off on their own adventures without him will help, then he thinks they should do it. Frontier's character writing choices are a really solid direction for the main game series to take for once, and I hope they keep Ian Flynn around so he can keep these character arcs going. It was really refreshing to see actual character depth in a Sonic game again, especially after how the last couple of games have treated them. It's nothing insanely groundbreaking, but for a series of games that were kind of stuck in a rut character-wise for a few years, this is a nice breath of fresh air. The characters aren't the only refreshing thing about the game though. The new style of level design they went for this time around also refreshes the Sonic formula in a really fun way in my opinion. If you heard anything about this game before launch, you probably heard about its new open world structure that got immediately compared to Breath of the Wild. While there is a lot of truth there, I think that the game deserves a bit more of its own merit for the open zone structure it goes for. I think this game breaking up everything into zones instead of one continuous open world is a very good direction to take for Sonic. Specifically because having these smaller sandboxes to traverse through instead of one giant world allowed for Sonic Team to make each of these their own well-crafted little skate parks of stuff for Sonic to do, instead of just trying to make one continuous world with the same feeling all throughout it. One giant world could have worked most likely, but I personally think the choice they made here worked better for the game overall. Each of the islands have unique environments and different things to take advantage of Sonic's ever-growing list of abilities, including new boss fights and different kinds of challenges to get level up items, which I'll go over in more detail later. My personal favorite was the second island due to how a lot of the challenges were laid out, how the newly introduced bosses were, and because I generally just like desert aesthetics. These open world levels aren't all the game has to offer though. There's also several cyberspace levels in each zone that play like classic 3D Sonic levels. A lot of them are actually heavily inspired by level layouts from the previous games too. There were several moments where despite the theming being different, I was able to tell which Sonic level it was, and honestly I thought that was neat even if I wished more than just the last zone had entirely original levels. These levels are needed to progress the story since beating them gets you the items you need to unlock the Chaos Emeralds on each island, and you get more keys to unlock the Emeralds by completing 4 objectives on each cyberspace level. Namely, getting all the red rings, getting over a certain number of rings, finishing a set amount of time, and just finishing the level. I generally went for all 4 on every level because I ended up really liking these. I'm a big time trials guy, so having them built in as a core component of the game made me try really hard to get everything I could in one go, just to see if I could. And if I couldn't, I'd go back and do it anyway because I already got a few of them done at this point, so I may as well do all of it. I think overall the level design for this game was solid in both the open zones and the more linear cyberspace levels. There's a bit of polish that could be applied to the zones still. I really wish there was more original cyberspace levels than what we got, but overall I had a good time with what was there, and I honestly think that if they made a sequel in the same style, my issues with levels we got will probably be fixed given the direction Sonic Team has taken here. Part of what makes this level design work though is how it plays really well against the gameplay systems the game is set up and changed. Sonic Frontiers makes a lot of changes to the base gameplay cycle of Sonic games that I think are going to be really strong starting points for the franchise going forward. The biggest noticeable example is how the game handles the boost mechanic this time around. In previous games you could just hold and boost infinitely, basically destroying everything in your path and not really having to engage with the level much, if at all, beyond occasionally jumping. This time around, however, boosting is more of a quick burst you can do like it's a dash in other games, and you're not invincible during it, so there's a bit of a risk of doing it in your enemies that I think adds a lot of thought to how you need to move throughout the levels and zones of the game using it. The biggest changes to the loop though come through how the combat of the game has changed. In previous 3D games, combat has generally been very oriented on just using a homing attack to hit every enemy, but that's changed this time around. Now Sonic has several Dragon Ball-esque attacks he can do in order to take down the various enemies he may run into throughout the Starfall Isles. These are all visually pretty fun and feel pretty nice to pull off for some of the harder ones, though they do get a little scripted after you've done them a couple times. You can't really use them much in the cyberspace levels though, since they're a lot more confined and linear, but they do make for some fun encounters in the zones when you run into a boss or a group of smaller enemies. The homing attack is still in this game as well, but it's changed a little bit. It's made to feel a bit meatier in how you land it. You hit an enemy and then you stay there for a moment so it can't just be endlessly spammed like in past games. It makes it feel more deliberate and more careful than just something you do to speed between enemies like in previous Sonic games. These new combat mechanics aren't just used for fights though, actually. They're incorporated into how you interact with a number of puzzles you need to do to get the level up items and things to progress the story. Oh, that's right, I almost forgot to explain that. Sonic has levels in this game. You can level up your speed, your max ring count, your defense, and your attack. Your attack and defense is leveled up by bringing these weird looking fruits to this old statue guy called an Elder Coco, and you level up your rings or speed based on leading these baby Cocos back to the other Elder you can meet. I personally never saw a reason to go for rings, so I just dumped all the Cocos into speed, and you get a lot of both kinds of fruits for attack and defense levels throughout the game, so that's never really an issue. It's an interesting system, and I loved feeling Sonic get faster and faster as the game went on, but man, they really need to add some sort of select all option for the speed level up because that takes forever if you want multiple level ups from them at once. An easy way to get these level up tokens is through the fishing minigame that Big the Cat runs. It's not mind-blowing by any means, but it's fun. It's nice and relaxing, and it's a good little break from everything else. The last part of the gameplay I want to talk about before I finish up this section is the boss fights in the game, aka one of my favorite parts. After you've finished collecting the Chaos Emeralds on each island, you get to fight one of the giant robotic titans that Sage has been controlling to impede Sonic. You fight 4 of these throughout the game, and each one feels really unique and fun to fight. I loved all of them, but I particularly enjoyed fighting Supreme, the titan on the final island. That fight really put the player to the test to see if they understood everything they've done up to this point, and it made it one giant supersonic spectacle as you kicked its ass. It would have been a great final boss fight if they didn't immediately make you play a mediocre shmup against the moon right after. Yeah, this was probably one of the weirdest decisions the game made. There were 2 instances of this little hacking minigame in the game, and then for some reason it's the final boss, only if you're on hard mode also? for some reason. I really don't get why, and it's kind of a letdown after how much I enjoyed the Titan boss fights, if I'm being honest, but hey, one boss being bad out of 5 isn't too bad, I guess. The game makes solid changes to the gameplay loop that I thought were pretty decent overall, but I think it could go further and be more refined since a lot of it still feels very experimental for the series. Whenever we get a Frontiers 2 or whatever they call the next game, we'll probably see an evolution of it, so I'm very much looking forward to that, especially if the soundtrack in that hypothetical game is just as good as this one's. The music in this game surprised me a bit. Not only does it have a lot of dynamic tracks that changed based on where you were and what was happening, but the tone of the music really got me going in a way Sonic music hasn't in a while. Sonic generally has always had great music, but I wasn't a huge fan of the soundtracks for the last 2 games, Lost World and Forces, so I was not super excited for how this game would be music-wise, like with everything else. But I have to say, I'm in love with this game's soundtrack. The aspect of it that stood out to me the most, though, was the boss music. Back when Sonic made the jump to 3D, the music for the series became a bit different from how it was before, and that they started incorporating vocal tracks that were thematically relevant to what was going on in the plot at the time. This would lead to tracks like Open Your Heart, Live and Learn, What I'm Made Of, His World, you get the idea. While Sonic games still had those, with the more recent games, there was a bit of the magic gone, I felt like. Like, I'm sorry, but Fist Bump just doesn't really hit the same emotional high as the others. When Forces had vocal tracks, they felt more like they were there more out of obligation rather than wanting them to be there or having them be appropriate to when they showed up in the game. I can happily say that's not the case here in Frontiers. During those Titan boss fights I mentioned earlier, once you manage to go supersonic, a vocal theme in the vein of those older songs kick in, and it really adds to the fights in a way that I can't describe other than being extremely hype. The music in this game feels extremely impassioned in a way that Sonic music didn't for a long while, and I'm extremely happy about that and love the quality this game shows on the musical side of things. But all that being said, I think the thing that really elevates this game for me is the fact that it's the first Sonic game in a long time to feel proud to be a Sonic game. There's been this tone of Sonic games made by Sonic teams since Unleashed where they felt like they were afraid to embrace being Sonic. Even Sonic Generations, which is supposed to be the celebration of Sonic's history up to that point, was very safe, played like a Sonic game made for people who didn't like Sonic, and didn't really try to do anything unique writing-wise. This kind of tone is felt throughout the other main Sonic games released in the past decade, like Colors, Lost World, and Forces as well. Mania was pretty much the only break from this, but that also wasn't directly made by Sonic Team. Mania and this game do have a lot of very similar design philosophies though, in my opinion. Both games look back at Sonic's past in order to make something that looks towards the future. Mania accomplishes this through remixing old levels from 2D games and adding their own in order to make a 2D Sonic experience that is the best Sonic has ever been, in my opinion. Meanwhile, Frontiers takes concepts and gameplay loops from older Sonic games and works them into a new format that works really well for the kind of gameplay the series is known for. I've already talked at length about all the aspects of Frontiers that I liked and how this is the best Sonic has felt in years in a lot of aspects, but those aspects all just combined in a way that makes Frontiers feel like this massive love letter to the series in a way I wasn't expecting from Sonic, especially after Forces. I personally feel that this feeling is further compounded by the ending theme for the game, One Way Dream. From what I've seen said in interviews, the song was written as a letter from Sonic Team to the fans, and listening to the lyrics of the song, which I'll link down below, you can really feel what they were going for with it. They're basically saying, hey, we know things have been rough, we know we're treated as a joke at this point, but we're not stopping. We're going to keep trying and nothing's going to stop us from doing everything we can to make Sonic the best he can be. The song is only heard if you finish the game on hard mode, and I think that also just makes it a little more special, showing that even after hardship you can look towards the future with optimism and excitement for what you can accomplish. Not only is that a cool message coming from a studio that has been through the ringer with corporate mandates, bad development cycles, and just weird decisions overall, it's one that is extremely in character for who Sonic himself is. I feel like the team currently behind Sonic really know what they're doing, and I'm excited to see what the series goes in the future with Frontiers' future content updates, as well as with whatever the next game ends up being. Before we close out, I just wanted to introduce a section I'm going to be doing in every episode of Jay Talks About Games going forward, and that's the tier list. I'm going to be tiering every game I make an episode on just to kind of scale how much I ended up liking each game compared to each other. So where does that put Sonic Frontiers as our first game on the list? Well, I'd say it's an A tier game in my opinion. It's not perfect by any means, but it's pretty damn good, and I enjoyed it immensely. Definitely recommend checking this out if you get the chance. Should be interesting to see how everything else I have planned out for the show shakes out on this list also after this. And with that, that's all I really have to say about Sonic Frontiers. Thank you for joining me today on this first episode of Jay Talks About Game. I'm going to try to upload new episodes of this every other Friday, so stay tuned for that if you like this episode. Beyond that, there's a few more things going up on this channel from my friends and I, which I'll have links to on screen and in the description down below. Be sure to check those out if you enjoyed this, since everything else we worked on is pretty great as well in my opinion. If you like this video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, since as I'm sure you no doubt know from watching almost any YouTube video, that's the only way for YouTube's algorithm to notice smaller channels. Anyway, I've been Jay, and thank you for listening to me ramble about Sonic. See you all next time!